I want you to picture a financial system for a second. But this isn't, Wall Street, and it's definitely not the IRS.
Not even close.
Imagine a system where paying your taxes isn't just a civic duty. It's an act of worship. Literally.
Yeah.
Mandated by the divine, but here's the kicker. Historically, it's enforced by the state with the threat of war.
That's a paradox, isn't it? It sits right at the intersection of faith, economics, and politics.
And it's a big one. We're talking about a 1,400-year-old economic model designed specifically to eradicate poverty. That's the stated goal.
Right.
And yet, when we look at the data today, in the very regions where this system is most prevalent, poverty is still stubbornly, heartbreakingly high.
Which, it forces you to ask the question, is the system broken, or are we just using it wrong?
Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we are tackling Zakat. And before you tune out thinking this is just some religious ed class about Muslim charity, you need to realize, based on the sources we've analyzed, this is a massive, complex socioeconomic engine.
It really is.
We're talking about a mandatory levy on wealth that has sparked civil wars, defined empires, and currently sits at the center of a trillion-dollar debate about global inequality.
It's fascinating because Zakat isn't just, giving alms or tossing a coin in a bucket. It comes with a very rigid set of rules, a specific calculation, and a defined list of who gets the money.
It's one of the oldest wealth taxes in existence, right?
Arguably, yes. It's all codified.
And we have a serious stack of sources for this one. We've combed through classical Islamic jurisprudence, modern economic critiques, arguments from atheist skeptics, and of course, defenses from contemporary financial experts.
A real mix.
Our mission today is to unpack a single heavy question. Is Zakat a divinely perfect solution to inequality that humans have just messed up? Or is it an outdated, inefficient relic that just can't survive in a global capitalist economy?
And just to be clear on our approach here, we aren't taking sides. We're not here to preach, and we're certainly not here to debunk faith. We are looking at the mechanics, the controversies, and the arguments found in the source material to understand why the system is so passionately defended by some and so heavily critiqued by others.
So let's start with the basics, but I want to get to tension immediately. What exactly are we dealing with here?
Okay, so at its simplest level, Zakat is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. It's a mandatory levy of 2.5% on surplus wealth.
Okay, and I think you told me to bookmark that word, wealth.
Yes, not income. That distinction is going to be absolutely critical when we look at the economics of this later on.
Got it. So 2.5% of your wealth paid annually, and the idea is that it purifies the rest of your money.
Right. The word zakat itself means purification and growth.
But here is the first major conflict I found in the sources. If zakat is an act of worship and ibadah, something you do for God, why is it forced? I mean, usually worship is voluntary.
It is.
If the government puts a gun to my head and tells me to pray, it doesn't really count, does it?
This is the coercion debate. And it's not a new question at all. It goes back to the very first days of the system. The sources highlight a massive historical event called the Ridda Wars.
The Wars of Apostasy.
Exactly. So, set the scene. The Prophet Muhammad passes away in the early 7th century. The first caliph, Abu Bakr, takes over.
Hey, he has a crisis on his hands.
Immediately, several tribes say, look, we're still Muslims, we'll pray, we'll fast, but we aren't paying zakat to you.
Why not?
They saw it as a political tax paid to a leader. Since the Prophet was gone, they figured the tax should end.
And Abu Bakr didn't exactly send them a late notice with a polite reminder?
No. He waged full-scale war against them. He treated the refusal to pay zakat as treason.
Treason.
Or even apostasy. This set a massive precedent that echoes down to today. Zakat is not a voluntary charity bucket, it's a state-enforced obligation.
That seems incredibly harsh for what's supposed to be charity. It sounds more like the mafia collecting protection money.
I mean, that's the critique.
So how do the theologians defend that kind of force?
They use a concept called haq Allah versus haq al-ibad, the right of God versus the right of the people. The argument is that once your wealth passes a certain threshold, that 2.5%, it literally does not belong to you anymore.
Wait, so it's not my money that I'm giving away?
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the eyes of this law, that portion belongs to the poor. You are just holding it in trust. So if you refuse to pay, the state isn't forcing you to be charitable.
The state is recovering stolen property.
That's the framing, on behalf of the poor.
That is a powerful reframing. It changes it from generosity to justice. But let's bring this to 2026, because in countries like Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, The state actually deducts zakat right from your bank account.
They do. And you also have secular income taxes. The sources call this the double burden.
And that leads to what critics call zakat fatigue, right?
Right. I mean, imagine you live in a country where the government takes a chunk of your money for zakat, then another chunk for income tax, then VAT on top of that. And you look out the window and the roads are still bad, the poor are still hungry.
You'd be resentful.
Incredibly. And it raises a spiritual issue, too. If the government just takes money from my account, have I actually performed an act of worship? I didn't give it willingly.
You didn't make the intention, the naya.
You didn't. So it just becomes another line item on your bank statement,
Yeah.
like a subscription fee you can't cancel.
It robs the payer of the spiritual benefit.
That's the modernist critique, yeah. It turns a ritual into a transaction.
Okay, I want to pivot to the math.
Okay.
Because this is where the economists in our source pile really started fighting. You said 2.5%.
Right.
To a modern ear, used to progressive tax brackets of 30, 40, 50%, a flat 2.5% sounds incredibly low, but it also sounds kind of regressive.
It's the 2.5% paradox, and you're right. On the surface, a flat tax usually hits the poor harder than the rich. But Zakat operates on a different axis. It taxes stock, not flow.
Stock versus flow. Okay,
Yeah.
break that down for me using the example from our notes, the widow and the consultant. This one really helps visualize it.
Okay, so this is the classic scenario. Picture a retired widow. She has zero income, no job, no pension coming in, but she has her grandmother's heirloom gold jewelry and maybe some life savings in a bank account. That's stock.
Right. Accumulated wealth. She's sitting on assets, but she's cash poor day to day. She might be struggling to buy groceries.
Exactly. Now picture a high-flying management consultant. He earns a massive salary, let's say $300,000 a year, that's flow,
Okay.
but he has a lavish lifestyle. Drives a Porsche, eats at fancy restaurants, pays high rent. He spends everything he earns. He saves nothing.
So under the zakat system,
The widow pays.
and the consultant.
The consultant pays nothing.
Wow. That hits hard. That feels fundamentally unfair. The widow is being taxed on her safety net while the high earner gets off scot-free because he's buying Porsches.
That is exactly the critique from modern economists. They argue it's regressive because it ignores income capacity. However, the expert defense is fascinating. They argue that Zakat isn't trying to tax income.
It's trying to do something else.
It's trying to kill hoarding. Kill hoarding.
The economic philosophy here is that money is like blood. It has to circulate. Economists call it the velocity of money. If the widow just sits on that gold or cash, zakat eats 2.5% of it every single year.
So if she does nothing, in 40 years, it's all gone.
Theoretically, yes. It's a penalty on idle capital. It forces her to take that money out and invest it or spend it.
It pushes capital into the market.
Right. The consultant, while he pays no zakat, is circulating his wealth by spending it. He's technically doing what the economy wants, moving money.
The system is designed to say, use it or lose it.
Precisely. But there's a huge controversy about when you start paying. The nisab, the minimum threshold.
And this is the gold versus silver debate. This part blew my mind.
It's a lesson in economic history. Historically, the threshold was set at two standards: 85 grams of gold or 595 grams of silver. Back then, they were worth roughly the same.
Equal purchasing power. And today,
Today, the divergence is massive. The gold threshold is quite high, around 5,000 or 6,000 pounds. So if you have less than that in savings, you don't pay. That feels right. It protects the lower middle class.
but silver. Silver has crashed in value. It's an industrial metal now. The silver threshold today is tiny, maybe 400 pounds or 500 pounds.
Wait. So if we use the silver standard, anyone with 500 pounds to their name, which is like 1 month's rent in a shared flat, is considered wealthy and has to pay zakat.
Yes, and that's the critique. If scholars stick to the silver standard, which some traditionalists do, they're effectively taxing the struggling working class.
That seems to completely defeat the purpose. You're taxing the almost poor to feed the very poor.
It's a classic case of the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. And most modern financial experts are shouting from the rooftops to switch to the gold standard.
Okay, so let's say we've collected the money, hopefully from the right people. Now we have to spend it. And the sources are clear. This isn't a slush fund. There are 8 specific categories of people who can receive this money.
Correct. And while some are obvious, like the poor and the needy, 3 of them spark some very intense modern debate.
Let's start with the most explosive one, fi sabilillah,
In the cause of Allah.
which historically meant
Historically, and let's be blunt, this category was often used to fund military campaigns. It funded jihad. It bought swords, horses, armor.
So the modern critique, naturally, is that Zakat is a war chest.
Exactly. Critics argue this is a loophole for funding militancy, dark money with zero transparency. If a radical group says they're fighting in the path of Allah, can they claim Zakat funds?
That's a scary thought. So how do the defenders handle this?
They acknowledge the history but pivot to context. Modern scholars have largely reinterpreted it. They argue fi sabilillah now means public good.
So schools and hospitals.
Schools, hospitals, clean water projects, that sort of thing. It shifts from swords to soft power. Though, to be honest, some conservative interpretations still hold to the military definition, which keeps the controversy alive.
Then we have mu'alafat al-qulub,
Those whose hearts are to be reconciled.
which sounds like a PR budget.
Or, if you're a cynic, the bribery fund. This category allows zakat to be given to non-Muslims or new converts to soften their hearts toward Islam or to secure their loyalty.
It sounds like buying allies. Here's some cash, be nice to us.
From a cynical lens, yes. From a defense lens, it's pragmatic statecraft. It was about stabilizing a fragile new community.
And the third one, our recop, freeing slaves.
This one is fascinating because people say, wait, slavery is abolished, so is this part of the scripture obsolete?
That's a fair question.
But modern jurists perform ijtihad legal reasoning. They ask, what is the modern equivalent of slavery?
And the answer is?
Human trafficking, debt bondage, even prisoners stuck in jail just because they can't afford bail. They're redirecting funds meant to buy freedom for slaves to anti-trafficking NGOs.
So it shows the system can breathe and adapt.
That's the strong argument from the defense side, yes. That it focuses on the objective liberation.
That brings us to a huge dividing line, the exclusion issue. The sources are pretty clear. Zakat is generally for Muslims only.
Correct. It's traditionally viewed as an intra-community transfer, from rich Muslims to poor Muslims.
In a world of universal human rights, that feels incredibly exclusionary. If my Christian neighbor is starving and I have zakat money, I can't give it to him.
Under the strict rules of zakat, generally no. Critics say this violates the ethic of aid based on need alone. It discriminates.
How is that defended morally? Because that sounds tough to justify.
The defense relies on distinguishing between zakat and sadaqah. Zakat is the mandatory tax. Think of it like club dues. The club looks after its own members first. But sadaqah, voluntary charity, has no religious restriction. You can and should give that to anyone.
So zakat is social security for the believers, and sadaqah is general philanthropy.
Exactly. And there's the free rider argument too. Non-Muslims don't pay zakat, so if you aren't paying into the pot, should you be allowed to draw from it?
But historically, they paid a different tax, the jizya.
Yes, in the classical model. It was a separate but parallel system. Today, without that structure, the Muslims' only rule looks like discrimination. But defenders see it as internal community resilience.
Okay, let's zoom out to the macro level.
Yeah.
The mission of zakat is to eradicate poverty.
Yeah.
But if we look at the data poverty rates in Pakistan, Yemen, Egypt are still high.
This is the efficiency crisis. If this is a divinely perfect system, why hasn't it worked after 1,400 years?
The numbers in the sources are just staggering. Global potential of $500 billion to $1 trillion in zakat annually.
That's enough to wipe out extreme poverty multiple times over. But only a tiny fraction is actually collected. This is the implementation gap.
And corruption is a big theme.
It is. Remember the emil, the collectors? They get a cut. Critics argue this creates a self-serving bureaucracy where the fund becomes a slush fund.
And then there's the one day's meal problem.
Right. Zakat is often distributed as small cash handouts. It buys food for a week. That's relief, but it's not development.
Is giving a man a fish, not teaching him how to fish.
Exactly. It doesn't build a school or a factory. Critics argue it creates dependency, not empowerment.
To the defenders, though, they point to history. They say it worked once.
The Golden Age defense. They cite the Caliphate of Umar ibn Abdulaziz around 717 AD. The records claim administration was so efficient that they couldn't find anyone poor enough to accept zakat.
That sounds almost mythological. So the argument is, the system isn't broken, we are.
Exactly. It's a convenient defense, but it highlights a design flaw. If a system requires essentially perfect, saintly humans to work, is it a good system for the real world?
Right. And speaking of non-saintly humans, let's talk loopholes.
Oh, the tricks are legendary. The sources describe legal stratagems. Remember, Zakat is due on wealth held for a full lunar year.
Ah, I see where this is going.
So on day 360, 5 days before the tax is due, you gift your assets to your wife. Or you swap cash for, say, furniture, then swap it back a week later.
You reset the clock.
You reset the clock. You follow the letter of the law while completely destroying the spirit of it. It's tax avoidance 101, medieval style.
And what's the theological response to that?
They argue that Zakat is a test of honesty. You might save 2.5% in this life, but you've failed the divine test. The system relies on taqwa, God consciousness. Without that internal moral compass, the economic rules just fall apart.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've covered a lot of ground. What does this all mean when we put it together?
It leaves us with two very distinct pictures. On one side, the critical view. It's a regressive, inefficient, exclusionary system that can't solve structural poverty. A relic.
And on the other side, the defense. It's a spiritual act that penalizes hoarding, circulates wealth, and has the raw capital potential to solve poverty. If, and it's a big if, it's implemented with integrity.
The disconnect is between the ideal and the real. The ideal Zakat is a mechanism of social justice. The real Zakat is struggling with bureaucracy and loopholes.
It brings us back to that question of the divine test.
That's the thought I want to leave everyone with. The sources keep coming back to intention. If Zakat is ultimately a test, does its earthly efficiency actually matter to the giver?
So if I pay my 2.5% with a pure heart, I've passed my test, even if the collector steals it.
That's the argument.
But that's a terrifying thought, because if the goal was to feed the poor, and the poor are still hungry because of human corruption, has the test failed?
Or is the persistence of poverty simply the visible evidence of our collective failure to pass that test? That's the question that keeps this debate very much alive.
A heavy question to end on. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you in the next one.